Ethan Carter walked into the grand courtyard with slow steps. He had been called there by the royal guard, but he did not know the reason. The air was heavy with silence, and he could feel the weight of many eyes watching him. The marble stones under his boots felt cold, and the tall walls around him seemed endless. His heart beat faster, though he tried to keep calm. At the far end of the courtyard she stood, Queen Isabella. She was dressed in violet robes with silver threads that shimmered in the sunlight. A golden crown rested on her head, and her long hair fell like soft waves on her shoulders. She looked strong, proud, and untouchable, yet when her eyes met his, something happened that no one expected. She stopped moving. Her lips parted slightly, and her face turned pale. The queen, known for her calm grace, stood frozen like a statue. Her hands trembled as if she had seen something that should not exist. The guards around her looked at each other, not understanding what had shaken their ruler so deeply. Ethan felt his chest tighten. He had never seen her before, but her gaze cut through him like a blade. It was as if she knew him, as if she had seen him in another life. He wanted to look away, but he could not. Her stare held him in place. For a long moment, the world around them was silent. No one dared to move. That birds that had been singing fell quiet, as though even nature held its breath. Ethan felt trapped in that silence, a silence so heavy it pressed down on his shoulders. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the queen turned her head away. She straightened her shoulders and forced calm into her voice. She gave orders to her guards as if nothing had happened, but Ethan had seen her reaction clearly. She had been afraid, and that fear was directed at him. He lowered his eyes, bowing deeply, but inside his mind, questions spun without end. Why had she looked at him like that? Why had she turned pale at the sight of his face? He was nothing more than a soldier, one among many. There was no reason for her to freeze when she saw him. The guards led him back through the courtyard, but Ethan could not forget her eyes. They followed him like shadows, bright and piercing, filled with both fear and recognition. That night, Ethan lay awake on his narrow bed in the barracks. He stared at the wooden beams above him, replaying the moment again and again. He had never met the queen, never spoken to her, never even stood in her presence before today. Yet she had looked at him as though she knew him from long ago. He thought of the stories he had heard as a child, tales of knights and kings, of men who lived and died for the crown. But those were only stories, and he was only a man. Still, something inside him whispered that this was no mistake. The queen had seen something in him that frightened her. The next morning, whispers spread through the palace. Servants gossiped in the kitchens, and guards muttered during their watch. Everyone spoke of the moment in the courtyard. Some said the queen had seen a ghost. Others claimed Ethan must be cursed. A few even said he bore the face of a long-dead knight whose name had been lost to time. Ethan ignored the whispers, though they followed him everywhere. He focused on his duties, but his mind returned again and again to the queen's pale face. He wanted answers, yet he did not dare ask. She was a ruler, and he was only a soldier. Their worlds were far apart, but deep in his heart, he knew this was only the beginning. Something had been set in motion. Something that would not let him rest until the truth was uncovered. Ethan could not escape the memory of the queen's pale face. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her freeze in the courtyard, her body stiff and her eyes wide. He tried to bury the thought under his duties, but it followed him everywhere like a shadow. The other soldiers treated him differently now. Some gave him looks of curiosity, others avoided him as though he carried a strange secret. One afternoon, while Ethan was sharpening his sword in the barracks, a messenger arrived. The man carried a scroll sealed with the royal crest. Ethan's name was written on the outside in neat ink. His heart sank as he broke the seal and read the words inside. The queen had summoned him to the palace. He'd walked through the marble halls with heavy steps, his armor clinking softly in the silence. The palace was filled with beauty that made him feel small. Tapestries of past battles hung on the walls. Golden chandeliers glowed above, and polished floors reflected his shadow. He felt out of place, a simple soldier in a world of kings and queens. Last, he was led into a chamber where Queen Isabella stood near a tall window as the sunlight poured over her, turning her golden crown into a halo. She did not turn at once, but when she did, her eyes were calm, though her face looked weary.
"Not Ethan Carter,"
she said softly. her voice carrying both strength and hesitation. "Do you know why I called you here?" He bowed his head. "No, Your Majesty." She studied him in silence for a long moment, her eyes moving over his face as though she was searching for something. Then she spoke again, her words slow and heavy. "When I saw you in the courtyard, I froze because you reminded me of someone. Someone I thought I would never see again." Ethan's chest tightened. "Who was he?" The Queen turned her eyes back to the window, her voice lowering to almost a whisper. "A knight. His name was Adrian. He served this kingdom many years ago. He was brave, loyal, and true. And you look exactly like him." Ethan blinked in confusion. "That cannot be, Your Majesty. I've never heard this name before. I did not expect you to understand," she said. "He gave his life to protect the crown during a war. When I saw you, I felt as if the past had returned. For a moment, I thought I was seeing his ghost." Her words left Ethan speechless. He could not explain why his face would be the same as a knight who had lived and died long ago. He wanted to speak, but no words came. The Queen turned back to him, her eyes sharp but not unkind. "I need you to remain silent about this. Do not share what I told you. People already whisper too much. If they believe you are more than a soldier, it may bring unrest to the kingdom." Ethan nodded slowly. "I understand, Your Majesty. You may go now," she said, though her eyes lingered on him as if she wished to say more. When he left the chamber, Ethan's mind spun with questions. Who was this knight, Adrian? Why did he look like him? Was it only chance? Or was there a deeper reason he could not rest until he knew the truth? That night, Ethan returned to the barracks, but sleep would not come. He thought of the Queen's trembling voice and the way she had looked at him. He rose quietly from his bed and slipped into the shadows of the palace halls. His feet carried him toward the archives, a place where old records and scrolls were kept. The room smelled of dust and parchment. Shelves rose high above him, filled with the history of the kingdom. By the light of a lantern, he searched for the name Adrian. It did not take long before he found a record of knights who had served the crown. His breath caught when his eyes landed on a page. There, in faded ink, was the name Sir Adrian. Next to it was a portrait drawn by a court artist long ago. Ethan stared at the page, his heart pounding. The face in the drawing was his own. He dropped the book to the table and stepped back, his hand shaking. It was no mistake. The knight and he were the same in every line of the face. The Queen had not imagined it. She had not mistaken him for someone else. He truly bore the face of a man long dead. And in that moment, Ethan understood that his life was no longer ordinary. Something bound him to the past, something greater than he could yet see. Ethan could not forget the portrait he had seen in the archives. The drawing of Sir Adrian looked so much like him that it felt as though he had been staring at his own reflection. He turned the pages again and again, hoping to find a difference, but there was none. The same eyes, the same jawline, the same expression of quiet strength. It was as if time had folded, placing his own face on a knight who had lived more than a century ago. Sleep left him that night, and when dawn came, he was still sitting in the cold archives, staring at the open book. Questions circled in his mind. Was it only chance that he looked like this knight, or was there something more, something hidden that no one dared to speak of? He wanted answers. But the more he searched, the more the mystery grew. Over the next days, Ethan went about his duties with a heavy heart. Every sword, drill, every patrol, every order felt meaningless compared to the truth he wanted to uncover. The Queen's words echoed in his head. She had known Adrian. She had seen him give his life for the crown. And when she saw Ethan, she thought the past had returned. One evening, while Ethan polished his armor in silence, a fellow soldier named Daniel leaned close and whispered, "They say the Queen has spoken to you. Is it true?" Ethan stiffened. "What do you mean?" Daniel smirked. "Do not play dumb. Everyone talks about it. The Queen looks at you differently. Some think you are cursed. Others think you carry a blessing. Which one is it?" "I am only a soldier," Ethan said firmly. But inside, he was not so sure. The whispers spread even more after that. Servants bowed nervously when Ethan walked by. Guards gave him respectful distance. It was as though the entire palace felt something strange about him, even without knowing the full truth. At last, Ethan decided he could not keep silent. He had to confront the Queen again, even if it cost him his place in the guard. He went to the throne room and asked for an audience. At first the attendants refused, but when the queen herself entered and saw him, she paused before giving a small nod. He was allowed inside. The throne room was lit with golden light, and the queen sat high above, her crown gleaming. She studied him quietly before speaking. "You found something, did you not?" Ethan swallowed hard. "I went to the archives. I saw the portrait of Sir Adrian. Your Majesty, he looks exactly like me." Her eyes softened with both sorrow and fear. She rose from her throne and walked closer, her voice low. I knew you would find him. I hoped you would not, but I knew you would. Do you now understand why I froze when I saw you?" "I understand why you were shocked," Ethan said. "But I do not understand why it matters. I am not Adrian. I am not a knight of the past. I am only a man." The queen shook her head slowly. "It is not so simple. There is a prophecy, Ethan. It was written long before you were born. It spoke of the protector of the crown, a man who would return when the kingdom was in danger, a man who would carry the face of the knight who once saved us all." Her words made Ethan's blood run cold. A prophecy. He did not believe in such things, but the proof was before him. The portrait, the queen's reaction, the whispers, they all pointed to something he could not explain. "Do you believe I am this protector?" he asked. The queen's eyes filled with conflict. "I do not know what to believe. But when I look at you, I feel the same strength I saw in Adrian. The same fire. Whether you are truly his return or not, I cannot say. But I know one thing. Your arrival means change. And with change, danger will follow." Ethan's chest tightened. He had never asked for this. He had wanted only to serve quietly as a soldier, to live an ordinary life. Yet fate had drawn him into something far larger than himself. He bowed his head. "If danger comes, then I will face it. But I need the truth, Your Majesty. If I am to protect this kingdom, I must know what lies ahead." The queen looked at him for a long moment and whispered, "The storm is closer than you think." The days passed with heavy tension in the air. Ethan trained with the guards as usual, but the weight of the prophecy never left his mind. Each time he lifted his sword, he wondered if it was true that he was meant for something greater. The queen's words echoed in his thoughts. A storm was coming, and it was closer than he believed. One evening, as the sun sank behind the hills, the sound of war drums reached the capital. The people in the streets froze, fear spreading like fire. From the high walls of the city, soldiers saw the banners of a rival kingdom moving through the valley. The enemy had come with thousands of men, ready to lay siege to the capital. The alarm bells rang through the city. Soldiers rushed to their posts, and the gates of the palace were locked tight. Ethan stood with his fellow guards, his heart racing. This was no small raid. This was an invasion. The prophecy had come true faster than he expected. That night, Queen Isabella summoned her council. Generals, ministers, and commanders filled the great hall, but their faces were pale. The enemy outnumbered them greatly. The walls could hold for a time, but without a miracle, the kingdom would fall. The queen listened in silence as her council argued, fear thick in their voices. At last, she raised her hand, and the hall went silent. "We will not surrender," she said firmly. "This kingdom has stood for generations, and it will not fall while I live." Her eyes turned to Ethan. "We have a protector. He may not understand his place yet, but I know he carries the strength we need." All eyes turned to Ethan. He felt the weight of their stares pressing down on him. He wanted to protest, to say he was only a soldier, but the queen's trust gave him no choice. He bowed his head. "If it is my duty to protect, then I will fight." The queen gave a small nod, her voice steady. "Then take this." She stepped down from her throne and placed an ancient sword in his hands. The blade shimmered faintly, as though touched by light itself. This was once carried by Sir Adrian. Now it belongs to you." Ethan gripped the hilt tightly. The sword felt heavy, but alive, as though it carried the spirit of the knight whose face he bore. For the first time, he felt a strange sense of purpose. When dawn came, the enemy forces gathered outside the city walls. Their drums shook the ground, and their war cries filled the air. Inside the gates, Ethan stood with the soldiers, his sword gleaming in the rising sun. The people looked at him with hope, whispering that perhaps the prophecy was real. The first attack came with the force of thunder. Siege towers rolled forward and ladders crashed against the walls. Arrows filled the sky like rain. The capital shook with the sound of battle. Ethan fought side by side with his comrades, his blade cutting through the enemy. His movements were strong and sure, as if guided by unseen hands. Each strike reminded the soldiers of the old stories of Sir Adrian, and their fear turned to courage. The enemy pushed harder, but Ethan refused to give ground. His voice rose above the chaos, calling the men to stand and fight. He became more than a soldier in that moment. He became a leader. The guards followed him with renewed strength, holding the walls against wave after wave of attacks. Through the night the battle raged, the fires of war lighting the sky. Ethan's body ached, his arms heavy, but he did not falter. Whenever the enemy seemed close to breaking through, he stood in their path, his sword flashing like lightning. By the time the sun rose again, the enemy had not taken the walls. Their first assault had failed. Cheers erupted from the defenders, their spirits lifted by the sight of Ethan, still standing tall, his armor dented, but his eyes bright with resolve. From the balcony of the palace, Queen Isabella watched. For the first time since she saw him in the courtyard, she did not feel fear. Instead, she felt a deep sense of hope. Its prophecy had spoken true. The protector had returned, and the kingdom still stood because of him. Ethan looked out over the battlefield, knowing the war was far from over. But he also knew he could not turn back. The storm had come, and he was standing in the heart of it. The battle had ended for the moment, but the kingdom was not safe. The enemy had pulled back, only to gather strength again. Smoke still rose from the fields outside the walls, and the cries of the wounded echoed through the city. Ethan walked among the soldiers, his armor dented and his hands stained, but the people greeted him with cheers. They called him the Protector, the man who carried the spirit of Sir Adrian. Ethan did not feel like a hero. His body ached, and his mind was full of questions. He knew the enemy would return, stronger than before. He also knew that the prophecy tied him to something far greater than he had ever wished for. He had wanted a quiet life as a soldier, but fate had placed him in the center of history. That evening, Queen Isabella called him to the palace. She stood in the great hall, her face pale from worry, but her eyes steady. "You saved the kingdom today," she said. "Without you, the walls would have fallen." Ethan bowed his head. "I only fought as any soldier would. Many gave their lives beside me." The queen stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Do you not see you were more than a soldier today? The men followed you because they believed in you. You gave them hope when all they had was fear. That is what a protector does." Ethan looked at her, unsure of how to answer. At last he spoke. "I will fight as long as I am needed. But I do not understand why I was chosen. Why me and not another?" Her eyes softened. "Some things cannot be explained. But I believe you were meant for this. When I saw you in the courtyard, I froze, because I thought I was seeing a ghost. Now I know I was seeing the promise of the future." Her words weighed heavily on him, but they also gave him strength. The next day, the enemy returned in greater numbers. Their siege engines rolled forward, their drums thundered, and their banners darkened the horizon. The city shook with fear, but Ethan stood tall at the gates. The sword of Sir Adrian gleamed in his hands, and the soldiers rallied behind him once more. The fighting was fierce. Flames lit the night, arrows filled the sky, and the clash of steel rang across the walls. Ethan fought at the front, never faltering. He defended the queen when assassins slipped into the palace, cutting them down before they could reach her. He led the charge when the gates threatened to fall, pushing the enemy back with sheer will and courage. Ours turned into a blur of blood and fire, but Ethan never let go of the sword. It felt as though the spirit of Adrian guided his every move. The soldiers around him fought harder, fueled by his presence. Together, they held the walls against an enemy that should have broken them. At last, as dawn broke, the enemy army began to retreat. Their banners fell, their drums silenced. The siege was broken, the kingdom had survived. Exhausted, Ethan returned to the palace. Queen Isabella awaited him at the steps, her crown shining in the morning light. She looked at him not with fear, but with deep respect. "You have fulfilled the prophecy," she said. "You are not Sir Adrian, yet you carry his strength. You are the protector of this throne." Ethan bowed, his chest heavy with both pride and humility. "I only did what was needed." The queen placed her hand on his shoulder, her voice soft but steady. "You gave this kingdom more than victory. You gave us hope that will never be forgotten." The people filled the streets, cheering his name. They sang songs of his courage, calling him the guardian of the crown. Ethan felt the weight of their voices, not as a burden, but as a calling. He knew his life would never again be ordinary. Though the war had scarred him, it had also shaped him. He was no longer only Ethan Carter, a soldier among many. He had become the protector the prophecy had spoken of, the man who carried the spirit of the past into the future. And as he stood beside Queen Isabella, watching the sun rise over a kingdom saved by their struggle, he understood that his destiny was no longer his own. It belonged to the people, to the queen, and to the history that would remember him forever.